A low, mournful cry echoed from somewhere deep within the woods, sending shivers down my spine. I glanced at Philip, my friend and fellow adventurer, who was already halfway done pitching our tent. "Creepy," he said with a chuckle, not looking up from his task. "Sounds like something out of a horror movie." I forced a smile, but the unease wouldn't fade. This clearing, unlike the countless others we'd camped in, felt strangely devoid of life. An unnatural silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a bird. The ground itself seemed to bear the weight of countless previous occupants. Rings of scorched earth, remnants of fire pits, dotted the clearing like forgotten wounds. "This place gives me the heebie-jeebies," I mumbled, unable to shake off the feeling of being watched. Philip finally looked up, his brow furrowed. "Relax, Adam. It's just a clearing. Besides, the fire will keep away the creepy crawlies." He winked, then gestured to the pile of firewood we'd gathered earlier. Despite his attempt to lighten the mood, I couldn't shake off the gnawing sense of unease. The flickering fire offered little comfort, its dancing flames casting grotesque shadows that danced across the surrounding trees. Even the chirping of crickets, usually a comforting sound, now sounded like an eerie chorus in the growing darkness. Suddenly, a flicker of movement on the far side of the clearing caught my eye. A tall figure emerged from the darkness, shrouded in shadows. He stood motionless, his form barely distinguishable against the wall of trees. "See?" Philip said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Looks like we have a neighbor." He was about to rise and greet the figure when I grabbed his arm, my voice laced with urgency. "Don't. Something feels off about him." Philip brushed off my concern, his curiosity piqued. "Relax, Adam. It's just a guy." Before I could protest, he strode towards the figure, leaving me alone by the crackling fire, my heart hammering against my ribs. The figure remained motionless until Philip approached, then grunted a greeting. They spoke for a few moments, Philip's animated gestures contrasted by the man's stoic silence. Finally, the man turned towards our campsite, a bundle of firewood slung over his shoulder. His voice, raspy and laced with a southern drawl, sent another shiver down my spine. "Just livin' in a small hut on the other side of the clearing," he said, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary. "Thought you boys might need some extra fuel for the night." He dropped the firewood and disappeared back into the darkness as quickly as he had arrived, leaving behind an unsettling silence and a prickling sensation that wouldn't fade. As the night deepened, the shadows seemed to whisper secrets, and the clearing, once a peaceful haven, morphed into a place of creeping dread. Philip, oblivious to my anxieties, regaled me with stories from previous camping trips, his cheerful voice a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the woods. But with each passing story, my gaze kept drifting to the edge of the clearing, drawn by an unsettling feeling of being watched. Philip, however, seemed unfazed. He finished his story, yawned and stretched, finally noticing my growing anxiety. "You okay, Adam? You look like you've seen a ghost." I found my voice, barely a croak. "I don't like the feeling of being watched." "Relax," he said, patting my shoulder reassuringly. "There's nothing out there but trees and maybe a few curious animals." His words did little to quell my fear. In fact, his casual dismissal only intensified my unease. Was I being overly cautious? Or was I the only one who felt the oppressive weight of those unseen eyes upon us? Sleep felt like a distant dream as the fire sputtered and coughed, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls of our tent. Philip, usually a sound sleeper, lay stiff and unnaturally still beside me. The rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, which would usually have been a source of comfort, now only served to highlight the tension that crackled in the air. Hours crawled by, each one feeling like an eternity. The silence was broken only by the occasional hooting of an owl or the distant howl of a coyote, sounds that, in any other setting, might have been considered peaceful, but now served only to heighten my anxiety. As the first sliver of dawn light peeked through the trees, casting an ethereal glow across the clearing, I finally succumbed to an exhausted sleep. It was a fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and unseen threats. When I awoke, the sun was already high in the sky, casting a warm golden light across the clearing. Relief washed over me, momentarily dispelling the dread that had clung to me throughout the night. Philip?" I called out, my voice echoing eerily in the still morning air. No answer came, only the mocking silence of the forest. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scrambled out of the tent. I called out Philip's name again and again, my voice growing increasingly frantic with each unanswered call. Desperation fueled my search. I raced around the clearing, checking behind trees, peering into the undergrowth, hope dwindling with each passing moment. The silence mocked my efforts, offering no clues to my friend's whereabouts. Then, a horrifying memory flashed through my mind. The bearded man's mention of living in a hut just beyond the clearing. My fear turned to a steely resolve. I had to find Philip, no matter what the cost. With a deep breath, I pushed through the undergrowth, the dense foliage clawing at my clothes and scraping my skin. Fear gnawed at me, but the thought of Philip spurred me forward. The forest floor crunched under my feet, each sound echoing in the unnatural silence. Finally, through the trees, I saw it, a small, weathered wooden hut, smoke curling from its chimney. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of fear and hope warring within me. As I approached the hut, I knew this was the moment of truth. With trembling hands, I reached for the creaky door. It swung open with a groan, revealing the dark interior. A stale, dusty smell assaulted my nostrils, and a shiver ran down my spine. Cautiously, I stepped inside, my senses on high alert. The flickering light of a single lantern cast long, distorted shadows that danced on the rough-hewn walls. Furniture was sparse, a rickety table, a couple of chairs, and a cot piled with dirty blankets in the corner. But my attention was immediately drawn to a figure huddled on the floor. It was Philip, his hands and feet bound with thick rope, his face pale and drawn. Relief flooded me, momentarily eclipsing the fear that still gripped me tight. "Philip!" I cried, rushing towards him. He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "Adam," he rasped, his voice hoarse. He attacked me this morning when I went to relieve myself." His voice trailed off, and he winced as he tried to move his bound limbs. Fury and fear burned with equal intensity in my chest. I knew I had to act fast. But before I could even reach for my pocket knife, the creak of the door shattered the tense silence. The bearded man stood at the entrance, his face contorted in a grotesque mask of rage. He held an axe in his hand, the metal glinting menacingly in the dim light. "So, you found your friend," he snarled, his voice a low growl. "That wasn't very bright of you, boy." My heart plummeted to my stomach. We were trapped, two unarmed campers against a ruthless stranger wielding a deadly weapon. But the primal urge to protect my friend surged through me. "Let him go," I demanded, my voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor running through my body. The bearded man let out a humorless laugh, the sound echoing eerily within the confines of the hut. "Not a chance, boy. You both stay here, and I won't cause any trouble." His gaze flicked from me to Philip, his eyes glinting with a chilling cruelty. Just as the bearded man started to take a menacing step forward, a sudden crash from outside shattered the tense atmosphere. The sound of snapping branches and heavy footsteps sent both the man and me scrambling towards the source of the noise. Through a small, dust-covered window, I saw deer chasing each other. Seizing the opportunity, I lunged forward, grabbing the overturned chair in my hand like a makeshift weapon. With a surge of adrenaline, I brought the chair down on his shoulder with all my might. The man roared in pain, clutching his injured arm. It was a gamble, desperation driving my actions, but it bought us precious seconds. I scrambled towards Philip, his face etched with fear and relief as I fumbled with the thick ropes. "Hurry, Adam," he hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. My fingers fumbled, the knots frustratingly stubborn. But the sound of the bearded man rising to his feet, his fury evident, spurred me on. Finally, the ropes gave way, and Philip was free. Without wasting another moment, we bolted out of the hut. The bearded man, surprisingly quick despite his bulk, was already in pursuit, his guttural scream echoing through the forest. We ran blindly, branches whipping at our faces, thorns tearing at our clothes. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but the primal fear of being hunted fueled my desperate sprint. There were glimmers of light in the distance. It was hope, our chance for salvation. Clutching the phone in my hand, I prayed the signal wouldn't go out, Just a little more, I wheezed, urging Philip on. Just a little more. Finally, we sped out of the woods and onto the roadway. A gas station spread out in front of us, flooded with bright lights. Here! I shouted, falling to my knees. Without wasting another second, I dialed 911. Help! We're under attack. I blurted out, barely catching my breath. We're at a gas station,